Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us today. I have Joe Hamilton from Unigold giving us an update on the company. They've had a few holes from their current drill program reported and both really good hits. And I think they're waiting on a bunch more from the lab. So I'll let him talk about that. Before we begin, a couple things. So first of all, there will be a Q&A period at the end. So feel free to put questions in the Q&A box at the bottom. And this presentation will contain forward-looking statements. If you'd like to know what those are, you can find them on the company's presentation on the website. And the presentation there is the same one we'll be using today. Joe, thanks for joining us. It's been a busy couple weeks for you, marketing, I think.
Well, it has, Deborah. I've been telling the story, it seems endlessly, but you know, it's part of getting the word out there and getting people refreshed on what the story is. So that's been it's been good. A lot of great feedback, and I think people are really interested in the story.
Well, it sure looks like that today got pretty good price action in the stock.
Well, you know, a rising gold price, as it were. But you know, I think people are also anticipating that we'll have more good results, and that we'll certainly add tons in grade and contained ounces throughout the rest of this drill program. So it's just a matter of us getting the lab to quicken up their returns. We're still, I think we've got 16 drill holes finished. We've only been able to report 2. So the lab is still 6 to 8 weeks behind schedule, and it seems to be sliding a little bit further every time we talk to them. So
seems to be a common problem. You're not alone.
It is. Well, however, we can still, you know, it's getting more difficult to position drill holes. We delayed, we had 2 other drills that we were going to get out into the field and get them going. We delayed mobilizing those simply because of lack of assays. We'd be stumbling over ourselves trying to figure out how to position drill holes without getting the assays back. But I expect in the next 2 or 3 weeks, we'll be up to, back up to speed with getting those assays in our hands, and, certainly, hopefully getting results from the first 10 holes. So just have to be patient. It's killing me.
Well, I wonder if those delays that are sort of universally experienced in the junior space, whether that's going to create a scenario where you have a fewer percentage of discoveries because you're just plugging holes without the feedback loop. But we'll see, I guess, at the end of this year, I guess, whenever they resolve the lab issues. But anyway, I'll let you maybe give a bit of background on yourself and the company for those that may be new to it.
Sure, by all means. Once again, a lot of, or not a lot, but some of the statements I'll make will be forward-looking, and I think everyone should be aware of that it can change almost at any time as new information comes available to us. But we'll try to update the market as quickly as we can when we get new information. I'm not sure how many people are up to speed on the company, but I thought maybe what I would do is just let you know what we're planning and where the next drill holes would come from. The easiest thing to do is this presentation is the one from our website. I think most attendees have been through it already a couple of times, so I'll skip to a couple of slides, and I'd like to leave time for questions and answers towards the end of this as well. But for those people who are new to our story, we have one flagship property. It's called the Neita concession in the Dominican Republic. It's on the west side of the Dominican, up on the border with Haiti. And of course, for those of you who aren't familiar with the Dominican Republic, there is a world-class model mine. It announces a year that will expand to about 1 million ounces a year operations, and kicks out some considerable cash flow on the Candelones concession, or the Candelones targets, exploring some of these other targets, which are equally, but for the time being, we spent all of our time here at Candelones. Most of our drilling since 2016 has been focused on these red areas, which are high-grade epithermal mineralization. It's very young. It overprints all of the background mineralization that we find here. And most of our drilling has been focused on increasing the confidence level in the mineralization, as well as being able to pull it down to depth. Our current drill program is looking at expanding these to depth. And that's what we'll concentrate on. As I said, we've got about 16 drill holes completed to date. We expect to get up to about 30 drill holes by the time the program's over, and that will most likely be the end of December or early January. I'll draw your attention to the oxide mineralization. While it's a small piece of the larger, it does have some strategic connotations for us as we go into the future. The oxide portion is low-hanging fruit. Low capital, should be a fairly high IRR return on that portion of the deposit. To refresh your memory on some of the intercepts we've had, these have been fairly broad, fairly thick, and fairly consistent mineralization as well across all three targets, A, B, and C. I think that most people who are aware of the story know that these are individual epithermal veins, and we've been able to follow them over at least 200 meters of vertical extent, and some of them are up to 150 to 200 meters in width. Target A is almost 300 meters in along strike, and forms more of a, let's say, more of a chimney or a pillar. The geometry on this is a little bit different than target B and C, and I can show you that in a few moments. Once again, very consistent mineralization. This was a 30-meter intercept at 9 grams of gold per ton. Very consistent mineralization over that entire width. The smallest assay we had was about just over 4 grams. The largest was 19 grams. This means it sets up very well for underground mining. We should be able to use mechanized mining in these situations, which should reduce our underground mining cost as well. The contacts, both the hanging wall and footwall contact, are fairly sharp, and it's visual. Very quickly we go from disseminated pyrite in a dacite into this epithermal mineralization within a breccia, and so that it becomes very visual both on the hanging wall and footwall, which means from a grade control standpoint, it's relatively easy to decide where the limits of mining are. Some of the recent drilling that we've done, the drill program that we started last October through to March was really focused on increasing the confidence level of the near surface resources that we had. So we did a fair amount of infill drilling. We also expanded target C off to the west in some of that drilling. We expanded target B closer to surface, and target A, we extended to the drilling depth of our drills to the off to the southeast. So this that drill program ended in March, obviously with COVID. When we started up again in August, we completed the last 3 holes from that program that we had planned for infill drilling, and then we have now moved the drills to start pulling these deeper to try to add inferred ounces over the course of the rest of this year, and to try to determine what the depth extent is. Our target is to pull these down to about 500 meters below surface. They start at about 100 to 120 meters below surface. So we'd like to pull them down that deep, and we're on our way to doing that. A few highlights, from some of the recent drilling. Target C has continued to show us very broad, high-grade intercepts up to half an ounce of gold per ton. Those are the results that we just put out recently, came from this part of target C. Some of the drill holes we've got in target A, though, some of the most recent drill holes, while we don't have assays back yet, hopefully we'll be able to release those in the coming days. But some of those holes have shown us that at least the mineralization at target A and target B seems to coalesce. This area that seems to be a blank in between them, at least in drilling, we have intersected sulfides in there. Well, I don't know what the grade of them will be, but it does look like A and B seem to come together at some point, which was a big piece of the puzzle for us. If we can show that those actually connect up and that the subvertical epithermal feeder is related to this sulfide lens at A, which moves off in a different direction, then we can show that there's a little bit of longevity to this, as well as some zoning. So hopefully we'll get that. We'll be able to explain what those results mean in the future. And then towards the end of the year, we'll go out and we'll start looking at target D, which is a question mark. We're not sure what the extent is here, but there's no drilling underneath these 2 drill holes. These were holes from 2011. And at 9 meters at almost 11 grams of gold per ton, and 11 meters at about 6 grams. There's plenty of space here to be able to expand this to, and we'd like to target that to see if we can't add more near surface ounces to the puzzle. I think with that, nothing has changed with our metallurgy. The last time we put out metallurgy was in May of this year. We've started phase 2 metallurgical work. The phase 2 metallurgical work will look to pin down a process design for an eventual plant. It will be some element of gravity, flotation concentrate, and then leaching of that flotation concentrate. And once again, we are concentrating on the coarse grain pyroclastics. Those give the best response as far as metallurgy is concerned in a standard gold plant, standard recovery circuits of gravity, float, leach. So we can be masters of our own fate when it comes to recovery on site. The oxide target, we put out at the end of August, about 2 months ago, moved substantially all of those resources into the measured and indicated category. There's about 92,000 ounces in measured and indicated. There's another 38,000 ounces in inferred. The inferred is mostly transition material that's below 25 meters in depth. But this material, there's not really a pit here. It's about 20 to 25 meters deep, drapes over top of a hill. There really aren't any pit walls, and it doesn't really go down to form a pit. It's more of an earth-moving exercise, stripping it from the top of the hill, which is oxidized, and then moving that material onto a heap plant or onto a heap leach so that we can recover gold. We have started the process with Micon, who's now doing optimized pit and finalized pit designs as far as pit scheduling is concerned. That will move into a PEA, which will quickly turn into a PFS because the detailed engineering that's needed to be done is not going to be great, although there is certain requirements for a PFS that do require some form of detailed engineering as well as geotechnical work. We'll do that geotechnical work over the course of the next 3 months and then feed that into a PFS. We want to be able to use that PFS to apply for a mining license in the country as a standalone operation for the oxide, and we believe that will allow us to obtain that mining license such that we'd be able to start construction early in 2022, and then be in production by the end of 2022 from this oxide. In the meantime, we'll continue to assess the sulfides, and we will put out resource estimates on that as we go through the piece. So our objectives for the rest of this year and for next year, the oxide resource, as I said, we've defined M&I. We've more or less finalized the process design. We will do some more column tests to try to optimize the leach characteristics, but the process design is more or less finalized. We need to do a bit more geotechnical work, certainly on the location of the heap, to understand what the designs look like on that. And then the economic study, as I said, should be released. At this point, I think it will probably slide into Q1. We were hoping that it would be done in Q4. That's up to Micon, their engineers. But I suspect that they are going to want all the geotechnical work done before they publish the PEA portion of the project. The sulfide resource, as I said, we continue to infill drill. We've got 16 holes done at this point. About 6,000 to 7,000 meters are complete out of the 15,000 meter program. We'll keep drilling throughout this year, and as far as I'm concerned, we'll keep the drills turning as long as we can. The detailed metallurgical studies are underway to finalize the process design. Hopefully we should have those results, at least the first pass results from those, by the end of the year, and should be finalized in the first quarter. And then, of course, our big objective in the drilling is to expand the mineralization that we've got, that is the coarse-grained epithermal mineralization, to target about 2 million ounces of gold equivalent in all categories. We'd like to think a 3-gram cutoff would be appropriate, but it's truly dependent on the gold price at that time. With a higher gold price, we can obviously drop the cutoff, which should allow us to put more ounces onto the resource statement. Our CSR programs are underway now. We have started the engagement with the local communities. We have engaged the new government that took power at the end of August. We've started our national engagement program. with surveys both in the province and locally around. And we're putting together a sustainability framework that we hope will be finalized by the end of this year in consultation with the communities that will allow them to get a community buy-in to the project, such that by the time we put the application in for a mining license, the communities will already be on site and be able to show their support for the project. Just a quick note on the exploration targets, because I don't want anyone to discount the exploration targets that are here. Any one of these targets have the ability to quickly double our resources in finding another system similar to the one we've got now. The area that we feel has the highest priority is the MGN area. It's on the same gold trend as the Candelones. And once we finish our assessments at Candelones, which will probably be in the first quarter of next year, we will move at least 1 or 2 drills over to start looking at the MGN area. This area is very prospective. There's coincident gold, copper, arsenic, barium anomalies in soils at surface. There are good geophysical targets, both IP, resistivity, and chargeability anomalies in this area as well. It's centered on a plug of rhyolite with quartz feldspar porphyry coming into it. So all things very prospective for new gold deposits. We've got up to 10 grams of gold per ton in grab samples and rock samples from that area. And trenching also returned good results. So we really need to get over and assess that area, and we have the potential to perhaps double the gold endowment in the area by finding a new exploration and a new target. Maybe with that, I would throw it open to questions, because I think it's probably easier to answer questions from people.
Hi,
Deb,
Joe.
did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I'll ask you the questions, so you're not just all alone up here.
Please do.
I thought I saw some questions too, but now I'm not seeing them.
I can see them in the chat room.
Okay. So what is capex to get to production? Who owns the properties? Any royalties on your properties? I guess just start with those 3 and then I'll ask the others.
Well, I can talk about the capex to get to production. There will be 2 different capex numbers that we'll end up putting forward. The first one is the capex to put the oxide into production. The oxide will most likely be a relatively smaller operation. 3,000 to 5,000 tons per day from an open pit is a relatively small open pit. I expect that the capex on that project will be relatively low. And once again, as a forward-looking statement, we really have to wait for Micon to get their work done on what the capital cost estimates look like. But to guide people, I would expect the capex would be somewhere between $30 and $40 million for that oxide portion of the deposit, and that would include infrastructure on the site, a heat pad, as well as the mine operations and the equipment operations themselves in the gold recovery circuits. So that's sort of what we're thinking for that. As far as the capex for the sulfides, it's very early to put any kind of a number on it. But if we look at some other projects that are sort of the 3,000 ton per day underground mine flotation concentrator with a leach circuit, you're somewhere between $150 and $200 million in capital, including all the infrastructure that goes into the site and the site preparation. The question, who owns the properties? This is 100% owned by ourselves on the exploration license by Unigold. The exploration license is granted for 5 years, and we have renewed the exploration license successfully 4 times over the last 20 years. So Unigold has the sole right to convert these concessions into an exploitation concession or a mining license, while we hold it as a concession, as an exploration concession. So we've got the sole right to convert it into a mining license. And when we do that, we would own 100% and be able to extract, metallic minerals out of any area on the concession. There are royalties on the property. Osisko has the option to acquire a 2% royalty on the property once we deliver a feasibility study to them. We have the option to purchase back 1% of that. So in effect, Osisko, has the option for a 1% royalty. There's a government royalty on all mineral production in the country. And that is a 5% royalty on exported finished metal. But that enters into the fiscal regimen behind, the entire mining operations. So that sort of are the only royalties that are on the property, the capex. There's another question in the chat room about cash on hand. We currently have, as of today, about $5.4 million in the bank. That should take us through to the end of the first quarter if we keep the drills turning all the way through. It will certainly cover the engineering studies that we're doing now, the metallurgy, the PEA, PFS on the oxide portion. We also have a scoping study underway on underground access, and that will also cover that portion of the studies. And then, as I say, drilling costs us about $125 a meter all in for drilling. So we will keep drilling, keep the drills turning as much as we can, because as long as they continue to add ounces and add tonnage to our resource statement. There's another question in the chat room about what the tax situation would be like once production starts. The tax situation is really set out when the mining license is granted. And that the tax, the fiscal regimen, so that you have stability in a mining operation, is set by the government when the mining license is granted. It's reviewed every 25 years. So it's basically reviewed twice during the time that you hold the 75-year mining license. The current tax situation in the Dominican Republic, there's a 40% corporate tax on income, but that's for basic, let's say, basic businesses. In the case of mining, the government has said quite repeatedly over the years that they would like to have somewhere between a 40 and a 50% economic interest in any mining operation. But the way that economic interest is defined in their minds is that includes income taxes on payroll, on money that's paid to employees, that income tax goes to them. Any community benefits that are realized as a result of the company contributing to local initiatives. It also includes the 5% royalty on export of finished products. So all of that lumps in to get to a 40 to 50% economic interest for the government. And that's certainly what they're running at Pueblo Viejo at this point. The government has just about a 50% economic interest when all the VAT is added up and all the payroll taxes are added up and all the benefits to local communities as well as the royalties are added up. So I don't think it'll be much different when we get into the negotiations during the mining license. Another question here. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Joe. I was going to just say, since you're already talking about the Dominican, maybe you can talk about some of the other players in the area and what's going on currently in the Dominican.
Yeah, there's been, since the new government got put in place at the end of August, there's been a bit of a rush on exploration concessions. There's been a large number of applications made for exploration concessions in the country. I think if I was to just go back here a couple of slides to the larger country. So quite a few people have put in applications. The government has received those. Barrick has been quite active. They've put in 9 or 10 applications for mining concessions or exploration concessions at this point in the country. The most prospective ground is in the central Cordillera that runs through the middle of both Haiti and the Dominican Republic. This is an old volcanic arc, series of volcanoes with acid volcanics and epithermal systems associated with it. In the Dominican Republic, a lot of the ground here in the Cordillera is mafic. There are some ultra mafics and mafic seafloor volcanics that are thrust on top of the acid volcanics. This area is more prospective for copper targets, and there's some nickel laterites in here as well, where some of the ultra mafics are weathering at surface. But by far, the biggest piece of ground that is prospective for gold targets is the Neita concession and the area up to the northwest of the country. Maybe I can, if I stop this share, I may be able to do another share with you quickly. which is the government website, which shows the concessions that have been applied for in the country. Here's a picture of the Dominican Republic. All of these are exploration or mining concessions that have been applied for. Quite a few recently applied for around Pueblo Viejo. Pueblo Viejo is the black area. The red area is Falconbridge Dominicana, which is the nickel laterite operation. There's a fairly large piece of ultramafic that's weathering its surface and creating a nickel laterite there. But you can see that quite a bit of the prospective ground is taken up by national parks of the Cordillera. These are the Gold Quest concessions along the south side of the national park. And of course, Unigold is over here close to the border with Haiti. That is really the bulk of the prospective terrain. A lot of this material are younger sediments that are thrust up on top of the acid volcanics. So really, it's just this area and down on the south side of the park that's the most prospective for the Torrio Formation and for these epithermal systems. Certainly, the Neita Phase 2 that's owned by Unigold is the biggest patch in the Dominican Republic, the largest project, I think, in the Dominican Republic for gold. These two areas next to them were recently applied for by Barrick International, and those are going through the permitting process at this point and will probably be awarded, I would guess, later on this year or early next year, so that Barrick can get in and start doing some exploration in that area. But there really isn't much more prospective terrain because as you get down here, you get into mafics and ultramafics for the most part. You can see that most of the exploration concessions are all around Pueblo Viejo. That's really closeology for the most part. Quite a few of these are also limestone concessions, and some of them are non-metallic concessions as well. I hope that sort of is that question. And this is freely available public information. It's on the direction on this website, minera.gobernador de Dominicana. Anyone can look that up. Any other questions?
Yeah, there's a few more in here. So
great.
Is JeanMarc LaCoste still a director?
JeanMarc did not stand for re-election at the last AGM, which was 2 weeks ago, so he's no longer a director of the company. He certainly came on board and helped us through, get our strategy straightened out and get us moving in the right direction. But I think for obvious reasons now, I think you'll see JeanMarc didn't have a lot of time. He's just sold Wasamac, so he'll be a very busy man with Monarch over the course of the next 6 or 8 months, I think.
Got it. And do you have the team to go to production?
The short answer is no. While myself and Wes Hansen, our chief operating officer, do have experience building mines in various remote locations, we don't have a team assembled to bring this through. That's something that we'll have to do over the course of the next 2 years, is to put that team together. We're quite confident we'll be able to do that, certainly starting with the oxide project, which is, as I say, not a complicated project, but will require us to bulk up our team members and bulk up the Unigold team.
And do you have any precious stones like Larimar on the property to sell off? No,
we don't. Most of the Larimar production is down by Baroa, down in the southwest part of the country. Very specific sedimentary regime there. There's no Larimar in the area we are.
Okay. I don't see any other questions that haven't been answered. I guess, Joe, one of the things that we talk about often is company remains undervalued versus peers. And I was going to get a comps table for today, but I couldn't get one that I thought was representative of a group that you would comp yourself against. But if I had to guess, you're about a half to a third the valuation of other juniors at your stage. Why do you think that is, and how does that gap close?
Well, I think there's, there were always two things that I would get pushback from investors on this project. The first one was that the metallurgy was not amenable to making gold on site. And I think we showed that that's not the case when we put out our metallurgy on the coarse-grained epithermals in the end of May. So I think we've laid that to rest. There may still be a perception out there that people aren't educated. That's my job to get them educated over the course of the next the next month. The second thing is the pushback was always, well, you'll never get a mining license in the Dominican Republic. That it just it won't happen. And the response to that is, well, what are you basing that on? I think everyone's basing that on a single application, which was GoldQuest. But if I go back to the, let me just share screen again, and we'll just go back to, so this is a map of the mining licenses. You can download them. They grant licenses every year, for limestone mining, for Larimar mining. Everyone is sort of basing the idea that you'll never be able to get a license on one application from one Canadian company, who I would suggest wasn't professional in the way they went about engaging the communities in the area. But the government of the Dominican Republic does indeed grant exploitation concessions, and they do grant them on a fairly regular basis. So you can get them. It's just you must follow the guidelines, and you must make sure that you've got community engagement and that you've got social license to operate. And I think that when that's done, I think Unigold will be in a good position. We've started our CSR programs in country through surveys of the local communities. I've got a presentation in half an hour from our consultants that we're using in the Dominican Republic, going over the responses from that. And we will use those responses in order throughout the engineering to ensure that we are addressing what the community wants to see in a project, and we'll get community buy-in before we put in the application. So I would like to think that the mining license would be granted in relatively quick turnaround if we have the communities on site and we've got the social license to operate.
Well, one would think in this current environment where one of the main industries in the Dominican would be tourism, and that's going to be significantly impacted this year. But one of the other major industries is mining, and I can't recall how much Pueblo accounts for the GDP of Dominican, but it must be significant. And I would assume that the Dominican government is pretty happy having Barrick in country right now.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure what the contribution to the GDP this year is, but it's significantly higher than it was last year. But what we do know is that, last year, the Barrick provided about 18 to 20%, or not Barrick, but Pueblo Viejo, 18 to 20% of the tax revenues of the government in country. So almost 1/5 of the budget in the DR was being financed by tax revenues out of Pueblo Viejo. I think with tourism going to zero, that number is probably 50 or 60% at this point. Now, Barrick and Newmont out of Pueblo Viejo made the decision to make some advance payments to the government in May and again in September, which gave the government hard currency and allowed them to keep the nation operating. That was almost $300 million in advance payments in taxes and royalties that weren't required. But I think Mark Bristow and I think Barrick are being good corporate citizens, and I think that's being recognized by the government in the country. That we're not big bag miners. We're coming in and hopefully developing resources that can be a win-win-win for everyone involved. That the communities and the government are also stakeholders in any mining, and that they should be able to realize some benefits from that as well. And I think that's certainly what the Dominican government's realizing now, that mining can be sustainable, it can be good, it creates good, high-paying jobs, and those have spin-out effects in the communities that in which they're operating. So, once again, I think that all feeds into the idea behind getting a mining license, but I think you have to do it sensibly and properly, and you have to be quite open about what you're doing.
Great. And so going back to the cap structure, are there any forced conversions on the warrants? You have a whole bunch that are in the money, even from the financing that you did earlier this year. Do you have any features on those to force conversion?
We do on all sets. We have about 3.8 million warrants that are outstanding from financing we did last year. Those can be accelerated at any time. There were about 14 million of those warrants, so quite a few of them have been exercised. I'll talk to the board about cleaning those up at some point. They're 15-cent warrants. They're well in the money, and people have had quite some time to exercise them, so they can be accelerated at any time. The other set of warrants, there's about 19 million warrants, including some compensation warrants that were put out from the last financing. As of the end of this month, if the shares trade over 60 cents a share for 20 consecutive days, we can accelerate the expiry on those warrants. Those warrants, if exercised, would bring in approximately $6 million onto the balance sheet. So there's a financing that's sort of sitting out there. And I think with continued drill results, I'd like to think that we can get the stock towards 60 cents. And as more people understand the evolving story and understand that this project is still growing and that we're de-risking the project, that our share price and our market cap will come up to let's say be on par with some of our peers, and that we'd be able to accelerate those warrants and put that money on the balance sheet in the future.
Mm-hmm. And then how much stock does management own?
The board of directors and management own just over 5% of the company.
Okay. And can you talk about some of your other significant shareholders? I think you did at the beginning, but I think it's worth mentioning again.
Well, our largest shareholder is Eric Sprott, and we do thank Eric for supporting us. He's been a great supporter. He's exercised warrants. He hasn't sold a share. He's bought stock in the market. His current position is about 17%, about 19.9% on a partially diluted basis. So, Mr. Sprott, owns this obviously for investment purposes. I think he likes the project and he likes the way we're pushing it. It's not unusual though. He owns a lot of companies, and he owns relatively large positions in a lot of resource companies. And that's really our largest shareholder to date. We have a number of other small shareholders that aren't reporting shareholders. I think Rob McEwen supported us from 2016 to today. He, as far as I know, he still maintains his position. Once again, he's not reporting, so I can't really see it on SEDI. But as far as I know, he hasn't sold any stock, and he's still out there and supporting us. So between those shareholders, that's probably about 30% of the stock.
It's a really strong shareholder base. I mean, it's been my job, and I have to point out the fact that it's improving, but it's been hard to really get investors out there to understand the quality of the assets and the quality of the company. But I think that the tide is turning, and people are starting to really appreciate what Unigold has, and also what the operating environment in the Dominican is. One thing that we've talked about is there's a lot of exploration, like pure exploration stories out there right now. And I don't think the market realizes, I think more sophisticated investors do, but people new to the space, that just because there's a discovery doesn't mean that that project or that mine is going to be built in this cycle. Whereas I think Unigold is one of the companies that's positioned that it could potentially be a mine in the next 10 years. I know you feel strongly about this and kind of how you're positioned. Do you want to talk about that?
Well, my comment has been, I've been involved for probably 20 years in the investment side of the business, and about 15 years before that in exploration. But one of the observations over that period of time is that it's getting longer and longer and harder to go through the permitting phase and to de-risk projects. If a project, and currently it's usually more than one gold cycle, from the time discovery is made till the time the project is actually got at a production decision. Part of the reason for that is it normally takes one production cycle, or one gold cycle rather, to move it from pure discovery grassroots through to resource statements, through to PEA, which no one's ever built a PEA. A PEA is just a study put out there for the market more than anything else. The level of engineering usually isn't high enough to support any kind of permitting. But then you've got to go through the permitting cycle. And the permitting cycle in some cases in Canada can take years. Certainly in many jurisdictions it can take time. And that permitting cycle then, by the time you get to a second gold cycle, companies are usually at the point where they're prepared to now go to feasibility level. So for an investor, my comment to them would be, if you want to invest in a project that will either go into production in this cycle or be taken out by a mid-tier or a large producer in this cycle, and keep in mind, mid-tier and large producers don't buy risk projects. They buy projects that have been de-risked. They don't like to assume risk, and they don't like to pay for risk. So if you want to invest in those type of companies, the projects have to be around for at least one cycle or two cycles prior to this one. So if you're investing in something where someone has just picked up a property in Nevada and is about to put a couple of drill holes into it, the chances of that going into production or being bought in this cycle are very low because they haven't been de-risked enough, and there's plenty of other projects that were here in the last cycle. So that's just a comment that I would make for investors. For Unigold, from where we stand, we were here in the last cycle. We did some fantastic work in the last cycle and showed 2 million ounces in resources in a pit outline. In between that cycle and this cycle, we've continued to do work, and we've identified high-grade mineralization that I think changes the game. And we've continued to develop that so that now I think we're very well positioned going into this cycle to either get to a production decision and to build the project and get into production, or to position ourselves where we've de-risked it enough that it becomes attractive to another producer or a mid-tier or a large producer. So, that's sort of our objectives on the way through.
Maybe one that operates in the country and might need some ore.
Maybe one of those. You'd have to talk to them about that.
Anyway, thank you, Joe. I don't see any other questions. I don't think we've missed anything material. So thanks for taking the time out of your day to give us an update. I think it's a really exciting time for Unigold. So congrats.
Thank you. Well, I do too. Stay tuned. I mean, we'll get results out as soon as they come to us. And it's we're waiting on the lab, but I think if people are patient, I think we'll be rewarded. Certainly the drills are still turning, and there's lots of core in the box. So lots of good things to come.
Great. Well, I look forward to the next release.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for your attendance. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact me, reach out either through the website or through Adelaide Capital, and we'll try to answer as many questions as we can.